Welcome, my friends, to another episode of your life, or at least the part of your life where you listen to podcasts. So here's a little tune, one of the above. Let me know if you know what it is. Don't let me know what that is if you're Mark McGlue, because obviously he knows what it is. Because he's a thorough hippo. He knows these things. So today we're going to talk about history. So who here knows the gist of what happened in human history? Most people I meet don't seem to. I don't know everything, but I studied history at university and I'm interested in history. So, and Wikipedia has existed since I was a teenager. So I kind of started figuring stuff out of curiosity, as you do, if you're interested. So I'm going to give you today the overview of what happened. You should probably know that, no? It's interesting anyway. Maybe you already know, but to refresh your memory, I'm going to pop in little details you may or may not be aware of, and just kind of thoughts I've had about history, and very interesting. Like, I think there's a lot of little interesting kind of insights and little nooks and crannies in the topic of history. Basically, it's the story of life, the story of humanity. Your own life story is probably the most interesting thing to you. The story of your family is probably very interesting. The story of your people. If you're in a newer country like Australia, shout out to Australia, then maybe, that story is a story of many stories coming together. But all of our stories go back to, Africa, don't they? Right? Or back to space, depending on who you believe. Maybe both. And so, we're all part of this long story called history. And in the previous podcast, number 7, shout out to the previous podcast. Can I do that? Ramses? Yeah? Oh, thank God, Jesus. Oh, okay. Yeah. So in the previous podcast about awakening, I was talking about the oneness of all things and how everything is basically one. And so the crazy thing is history is just one big story, and it's just one big snowball effect from the Big Bang onwards. It's kind of like the visible spectrum of light. The rainbow? That's like just a tiny bandwidth within a tiny band of vibration from what is it, ultraviolet to infrared, or the other way around, red to purple. Roy G. Biv coming in hot. So yeah, and then that's out of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is vast. There's microwaves, there's radio waves, electricity. This is all electromagnetism. We only see a little part of it. History is kind of like that, I guess, whereby there's a huge stream of cause and effect coming from the very creation of everything up to the formation of the planet. We don't call that history, really. We call it the history of the universe, sure, cosmology maybe. And then we have prehistory, where we don't have records of it. So even the history of the human race, what we would call history would be from when we started writing. We kind of remember what's been happening. Oral traditions, there are oral histories where people have kept, by word of mouth, passing it down through the generations. Of course, that can get mixed in with mythology then, whereby maybe they're making things up, that kind of mythology, like that. We just create some cool stories and maybe they teach us something. So, or as I believe evolutionary psychologists kind of talk about, like or at least Jordan Peterson does. I mean, I don't know how the myth can be a condensation or a distillation of the essential, most important features of many, many, many stories. So, say you have a 1,000 or 10,000 stories through thousands of years of your people's history. They will get only the essential feature, the most relevant, important, practical, the important features will be remembered. And stories which are similar will get amalgamated into the same thing. Someone repeats a story, it's very similar to what happened 1,000 years before, but there's one extra detail that's, whoa, that's really, that's very deep, isn't it? That gets added to the previous story. So there's mythology building up as well, in terms of a condensation of what actually happened. However, it's without written records, it's hard to know what's actually real, right? Although you could say, of course, it's true in a deeper sense of it tells you about the human condition and human nature, and that's predictive of what's going to happen in the future or what is happening now, Nonetheless, so we have mythology, but history proper, we would kind of say, from the dawn of literacy, reading and writing. And then who knows, say we all get blown to smithereens. Hopefully not. Don't worry. The soul is immortal. And even if it wasn't, what good would worrying do you? Let me know in the comments what good worrying does you. The universe will go on after us if we were to disappear, or if humans were to disappear. Consciousness, I don't believe, would be able to disappear. So I think it's everything. This has got nowhere to go. Where are you going to go? Detroit? South Park. Beautiful. All right. So anyway, so history. We're going to talk about history. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what's happened. What did I miss? Okay. It's going to be basically based on Europe, because that's the history I know best. And I would argue that with the history which has influenced the global history the most to date. So I'm going to talk about that, but I'm going to the limit of my ability, include the rest of the world and general stuff, what happened. So after this podcast, you will be able to say, if someone says, all right, sit me down, tell me what happened, you'll be able to, hopefully, say, all right, in a nutshell, this is what happened. After that, I'm going to also kind of talk about how and why things change in history. What are the basic principles? Because again, it's all kind of one flow of it's just history. However, there are certain principles or factors we could talk about, which are very useful for analyzing history and understanding why things have happened, and where we've been, where we're going, the factors which are at play still. And yep. So that's the how to research history, how to know what's actually legit and what's just history being written by the victors, and and also very juicy after that. Going to get into some stuff that basically history I would predict. I'm on the internet making the prediction. Other people have already made the prediction, but I will sign up to that. Say history, the discipline of history is going through a revolution, and in the halls of academia, it's not yet being allowed in very much, because if you try to write your PhD on this subject or even write essays on it when you're people have received very bad grades for essays where they wrote on this topic in the bachelor's degree at history, in the faculty of history, where it was like a good essay based on evidence, but that sounds crazy to our worldview, our paradigm. So no, we're going to shut that down. Snip that in the bud, right? So try to do a PhD on that. It's quite difficult. So the fact is, academics can be wonderful, but everyone's got their ego. We're all only human. So point being, there is a massive revolution in history in what happened before any of the recognized civilizations of what I'm going to be talking about first, of conventional history. And there's very good reason to think, and I'm going to give you the evidence, that there was indeed at least one civilization, advanced civilization, earlier than Egypt and Sumeria. So we don't know what they called themselves, but it has had various names. And you probably know it already. One of them, most popular, the Greek one. Okay, so we will get into it now. So the overview. All right, so about 10,000 years ago ish, right? Agriculture was invented. So if you have 100 people who live to 100, or people who live to 100, right? What is that? 100 of those guys or gals back, 100 centenarians back. So it's actually a long time, but in a way, it's not really that long, right? You can imagine 100 people in a room. Imagine 100 100-year-olds. Now, they're all born at the same time, given that they're in the same room. But if you said, okay, tell me the story of your life. Okay, now you tell me the story of your life. All those streams of experience, that's how much experience we're talking about 10,000 years ago. So in a way, it's not actually such a huge distance, but it is. It's a paradox, right? Okay, so 10,000 years ago, agriculture was invented. Taking little seeds of, basically, now I might mess up some details, but this is the gist, all right? And it's going to be an overview. So forgive me for any errors I make. So we have sowing wild grasses, basically grain is a type of grass, right? We realized, we can sow these little seeds in the ground and grow edible food. We don't need to be running around hunting and gathering the whole time, which can be great. They were healthier than the agricultural societies. The hunter-gatherers were, if they have good, territories, in general, they are healthier actually. Even in like the 1800s, the Native Americans were far healthier than the white settled society, because bread's just not as nutritious as like hunted bovine animals and eggs and vegetables or whatever. If you've got a fertile territory that you're moving around in, the book Tribe by Johann something talked about that, the Native American, and very interesting topic. So you could look that up if you want. Now, so nonetheless, the being able to be in one place and just plant lots of crops and start, I guess, I don't know if they're growing, conventional like plants or fruit trees, orchards around the same time. I'm not sure, but definitely grains began to be grown around 12,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And I suppose cows or milk and beef are probably doing around the same time. And this exploded around in the kind of Fertile Crescent area. So kind of the Middle East, kind of got Egypt, Holy Land, modern day Iraq, that kind of area, maybe the southern regions of Turkey or Syria, that kind of thing. So you got the Euphrates and Tigris rivers in Iraq, then just the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, Holy Land, and then you got the Nile River with Egypt. So these kind of areas saw the development, the rise of civilization, and you can keep all the food in one area, so that allows you to go, okay, you can still have people hunting, but maybe the lower class people aren't getting as good a nutritious a diet if they're just eating bread or whatever. But if you have enough wealth, you can still have that hunting and gathering going on. You can still have you're raising animals. So probably the upper classes were in general fine and healthy. Anyway, the point is they were able to gather their wealth. And if you can store grain, right? If you're hunter-gatherer, you can't store wealth more than a few days, then the meat goes off, right? So it's a different society. But when you can store food, then you can start to go, all right, I have my store of food. You're going to be a builder. You just need to build. I want you to build all day, every day. Your kids will be builders. You're going to get very good at building, and I'm going to give you all the food you need. I just want you to build. Like, sounds like a deal. Great. I love building. I'm good at it. And you're going to do this and you're going to do that. Or people saying, hey, I want to do this. Maybe I do this in my spare time, and start bartering for grain. And then people have the grain because they're farming. And so you can be a craftsperson, or you can do whatever it is, specialize in something. So the agricultural revolution gave rise to the development of trades, industry, cottage industry, and development of architecture and larger structures and cities, essentially. So, and then, you have a bunch of cities, maybe one of the cities in the area is on a bit better location for some reason, the natural, there's greater resources in the area. It gets bigger. The other cities can go there, and when they need extra stuff they can't make themselves, they go there. You have trade, so you have cities developing. Some of them, kind of bigger cities, being the city's city. They can go there if they need what they can't get in their own city. And likewise, people, nomads, hunter gatherers, or people in villages, kind of on the outskirts of the civilization, they can take trips to the smaller cities to get whatever they need. And so you have this dissemination of products, right? Pottery being made, all this kind of stuff, right? So this was on the backbone of the agricultural revolution. Now, so that goes on for a while, and then it goes on for a while, very, very specific. And then, so the oldest civilizations would be Egypt, ancient Egypt, Sumeria, or Sumer, which was in modern day Iraq, and turned into Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And yeah, eventually, I believe Assyria it turned into, but it went through, many different iterations, people taking over it, changing, eventually, it was part of the Persian Empire and Alexander the Great's empire. But the point being, these are the oldest places, like, the modern day Iraq and Egypt. Also very ancient would be India, the Indus Valley civilization. So on the kind of northwest of India. Also China, very ancient. So I think like they're all around similar time, I believe. Now, in the West, right, the focus of this, what I know most about. So Egypt, very mysteriously starts off really amazing, and kind of over time seems to decline, which we'll talk about as it's, there's reason to think they were civilization was kickstarted there by refugees from a previously unknown civilization. Similar thing seems to have happened in a few other places, or potentially all of these places. So, but Egypt, so conventional view would be about 5,000 years ago, 2,000 to 3,000 years BC or BCE. Egypt, dynastic Egypt appears, pyramid building, blah, blah, blah. And similar stuff in Sumeria. Then the ancient Greeks, they used to send people to Egypt to study. So the great, philosophers and mathematicians, etc., from Greece, which we tend to learn about in history class or like maths class or whatever it is, as the founders of Western civilization, they were actually going to Egypt already for studying and in commerce and many things. But Egypt was essentially the mother civilization. It was the equivalent of someone from somewhere in the world, a developing country, going to the USA or going to Europe or something to study. I think these people are more established. There's a greater network of knowledge and industry and etc., prosperity. So I'm going to go there, reap those fruits and bring them home to where I'm from and sow the seeds here. And so that's what's happening in Greece. And so Greece began to rise as civilization as Egypt was kind of declining, and under many pressures, military, climate change crises. Many times in Egyptian history is thousands of years long. Like the United States of America is like 250 years old. So thousands of years old, 4,000 years, 3,000 years, long time. So in there were many crises, and eventually it started to crumble. And the Greeks even took it over under Alexander the Great, who conquered most of the known world at that time. He took control of Egypt. And so Greek speakers actually, there's quite a long time where all of the Middle East, where now it's, Arabic speakers and Muslim societies, they were all Greek speakers. There were all these Greek colonies all over the place. And as far as India, Alexander the Great got to India. So Persia, Afghanistan, all these places you had like Greek, basically societies, to a greater or lesser extent. Some of them, maybe Afghanistan, it might have just been the ruling class were Greek for a bit. But you had legitimate, huge Greek numbers of Greek-speaking communities around the Middle East for quite a while, and the rest of the Mediterranean. So Greece, then the Roman Empire started developing after Greece. So it's the Roman Republic. They had a Senate. It's an oligarchical kind of thing. So the kind of established ruling families, wealthy families, they were the ones who were able to be part of the Senate. The plebeians or the plebs, they weren't patricians. They were the lower class. They weren't allowed to control it. So it was a limited type of democracy. Similar thing in Greece. Greece had slaves, but they weren't allowed to be citizens. But the free people, at least the landowners, I'm not sure exactly what were the rules. They had some form of democracy in Greece where there were collective decision making. And not going to get into the details of what these civilizations did or achieved, but just the basic sweep of what happened. So you have Greece, then Rome starts to grow. There's a lot of trade between Rome and Greece, exchange of ideas. Rome under Julius Caesar becomes an empire. Technically, I guess under his adopted son Octavian or Augustus, it becomes an actual empire. But Julius Caesar was essentially a dictator, de facto dictator, right? Even though not legally, I suppose. He was the dictator. He was the de facto emperor. Essentially, he was an emperor. And by that point, the Roman Empire had conquered Greece, and so they have North Africa, Spain, a lot of like modern day France, or all of that, I believe, by the time, most of it at least, by the time Julius Caesar died, all down through the Balkans and the Greece. There's I'm not exactly sure, and Turkey and the Holy Land and Egypt. All of this around that time, kind of becomes part of the Roman Empire, and you have the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which lasted for about, I think, quite a long time, 1,000 years or something, where the Roman Empire basically, they eliminated all the competition. And they were pretty ruthless, the Romans. I mean, to be fair, they're very organized, very capable. To some degree, you could think of them as the precursors to our modern civilization, because they were very orderly and intellectually obsessed, which is quite, I would characterize our culture as rather along those lines. More like more head than heart, but they did some great things while they were slaughtering people, and doing all these terrible stuff. They did nonetheless, do some legitimately amazing stuff. And so under that piece where, okay, basically you're not wasting energy on wars. There was an enormous flourishing of civilization within, like, under the wing of the Roman military monopoly over the Mediterranean. And so at this time, Africa, similar thing. You'd have societies developing from the tribal nomadic societies to kind of settled societies, but maybe still quite tribally linked, and then turning into kingdoms, where it's more some abstract sense of, okay, the kingdom, and I serve this leader, and we are part of this state that we have created together. And in India and China, similar things. The Americas, I believe, too. Similar things basically happen. I don't know the details there, but basically a similar thing to the Middle East and Europe, where you have the rise of these not nation states, but kingdoms, where you have a ruling family, and the state, which is kind of partly them, partly like but it's more than just a family, right? The state as an abstract idea has developed, and the empire, the kingdom, and then one dynasty of king or emperor and their kids and their kids' kids, etc. When one of them gets whacked, or not with a gun, of course, but or they just don't have enough children, or whatever, then another family would take over, and that's a new dynasty, but the same kingdom or empire, right? And so you would have these kind of abstract entities of empires, kingdoms, kind of continuing. So now we got to the Roman Empire, right? And eventually, the Roman Empire starts to get a bit sluggish, kind of decadent, and you know, maybe a bit out of touch with the harsh realities of what human beings can do when they are not comfortable and their basic needs aren't provided for. So you have these societies of largely like very fierce warrior societies, or societies where their warrior class are very fierce. Who knows what else was going on in their societies? Maybe they had a lot of softness there. I don't know. But you have what we would traditionally call barbarians coming across Europe, beyond the borders of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it never took over Ireland, although Christianity came to Ireland from the Romans. But it got, halfway up into Scotland, and that's where Hadrian's Wall was built. So they had Roman Britain, and I guess maybe France. Modern Belgium, I don't know if that was part of the Roman Empire, but somewhere around there would be the boundary. And then, or the Netherlands maybe, but probably not. I think that was just Germanic, beyond the pale kind of area. And part of Germany, they tried to go into Germany and they got chopped up badly in the Teutoburg forests. There's some battle where the Romans, they had a huge army and they went into Germany in the forests and they just never came back. They just got, chopped to smithereens by these Germanic tribes who appeared out of the woods out of nowhere. And so they were like, all right, maybe we'll just keep our boundaries and stop expanding. Big enough anyway. So a part of Germany, I believe the river Rhine in the west of Germany was one border. And then kind of the Danube, I think, was another border, kind of going through Austria and down through Eastern Europe. So, but all of Greece, modern day Turkey, that was a part of the Roman Empire. So these barbarians are coming over and they're starting to have incursions where they're breaking through into, and stealing stuff, attacking people. You can imagine what other things a bunch of violent men might want to do. So they're going in and doing this and to pillaging and whatever, the Roman settlements, and Rome's trying to fight them off and blah, blah, blah. That goes on for a long time. At some point, Rome finds, okay, it's too big. We're just going to split the empire in two. So they have the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire, and they each run by separate emperors. Then the Eastern Empire continues longer than the Western one. Actually, it becomes what we call the Byzantine Empire or Byzantine Empire, Byzantium. So the Western Empire goes on fighting. Eventually, around the year 500, I think 456 or something like that, it collapses. It's overrun by basically a Germanic tribe, or more or less, like I think some warlord who was working for the Romans turned on them, and overran Rome, sacked the city, and basically I don't know what happened to the emperor there, but it collapsed. The political entity just couldn't take the weight and lost its organizational nexus, and it was taken over by these Germanic tribes, quote unquote barbarians. And so they took over France, Germany, Italy, Spain, North Africa, the whole joint, right? The Western Empire. And these later would become the medieval states, the Middle Ages, the kingdoms of medieval Europe. But so in the East, the empire continues and actually lasts another 1,000 years. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, around the year 500, which is basically the beginning of the Middle Ages, that you have the classical world ending and the Middle Ages or medieval period beginning. That's the fall of the Roman Empire. That's actually just the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire continued another 1,000 years till 1453, I think. They did a lot, and made a lot of advances in all kinds of stuff. But and then eventually they shrank, the Eastern Empire, from controlling all of Egypt and the Holy Land and Syria and Turkey and Greece and up through the Balkans to part of Turkey and Greece and part of the Balkans to just the area around Constantinople, which is what now called Istanbul, right? It was conquered by the Turks, eventually, 1453, and then became part of the Islamic Empire of the Ottoman Empire. And so that, and then the Ottoman Empire, so around what, 600 AD, I think, you have the the Muslim religion appears, and they start spreading through military conquest. They, in the time of Muhammad, they do that, and then continues after his death, conquering lands and spreading the religion. And so that goes up through all North Africa, goes east through Persia. So it was Zoroastrianism was their religion. Islam kind of takes over. And you have, and of course, ends up getting to Afghanistan and Pakistan and India. Islam spreads, and all through, eventually Islam will spread down through Southeast Asia. But the Islamic Empire itself kind of gets up to basically Austria, the gates of up through a lot of Europe conquered. But then I believe they were fighting the Kingdom of Austria, or the Holy Roman Empire, I think it was called at the time, and they suffered a big defeat, and so they retreated, and they never quite came back that way. So that kind of, in Spain, the Islamic Empire did kind of go and take control, I think, of all of Spain. And then you have the Reconquista, where Christian kingdoms, knights, conquered and or kind of retook that the Iberian Peninsula of Portugal and Spain for Christian civilization, Christendom, right? Because it had been Christian under the Romans, right? So they kind of reconquered it, so to speak. So if we talk about like Western Europe, so you have the 500 AD-ish, the Roman Empire falls, and you have all these Germanic tribes. You have the Franks, they're one tribe. You have the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. You have other ones I can't remember, and they go around. They basically take lands off of what was the Romans, and in some area, they basically settle down and create their own little societies. So they the Franks turn into France, and you have the Goths, etc., turning into other kingdoms of Western Europe. And so around the year 800, you have Charlemagne, Charles the Great, Charlemagne. He's crowned the emperor of the West. So basically he had conquered, he had controlled, I think, all of France, modern day France, part of Spain, or all of Spain, part of Italy, I think northern Italy, maybe down as far as Rome, I'm not sure, and Germany, I think all of modern day Germany, maybe even part of modern day Denmark. So the Low Countries, I believe he'd conquered. So he's like, all right, yeah, we've got another empire in the West. Cool. So, and it was called the Holy Roman Empire. So it's not the Roman Empire. It's actually a different thing, but, branding, the Holy Roman Empire. So, and it's Christian. So they have the spiritual, so to speak, power in Rome. You have the Catholic Church, which had been developing, from the times of the Roman Empire. Constantine had converted the whole empire to Christianity, essentially. And slowly but surely, Christianity was, it over pretty, after there was a lot of persecution of the Christians under the Roman, original Roman, quote unquote, pagan gods. But eventually Christianity was adopted, and they, started persecuting the pagans, right? And so the Roman Empire was Christian by the time it fell, and then Christianity remained in what became medieval Europe, the Dark Ages or Middle Ages. And so the Holy Roman Empire was basically a bunch of different kings. You have local kings and kingdoms, and they would elect their leader. They would elect the emperor. They would vote together. And so you have the Holy Roman Empire. Now, France kind of broke off from that. I'm not sure how, really, or when, but that became the Kingdom of France. And then you had the Holy Roman Empire, was Germany and Italy. So that's basically that. And that goes on for hundreds of years. You have wars between the European states. England, very quickly, the Vikings from Scandinavia had been, kind of harassing all of Europe, and pillaging the kind of settled areas. Ireland had, as mentioned, Christianity had made its way to Ireland, and so therefore had literacy, reading and writing in ancient Greek and Latin, and monasteries were established in Ireland, and it merged with the Druidry, the local kind of nature worshipping pagan, you could call it, religion, and it flourished there. And there was this is where you get the term the land of saints and scholars for Ireland, because there's a long time when Ireland was the only part of Western Europe where there was general literacy. Everywhere else, the Dark Ages, essentially, people lost the knowledge of reading and writing and many advanced professions because there was a collapse of the civilization. And this is something we'll talk about later for our own situation. There's a danger where you get so advanced that you become top heavy, where you're focusing on more and more advanced skills, but you don't realize that the trunk of the tree, you need to be thickening that trunk. The more branches you have up the top, the thicker that trunk needs to get. And for example, if one solar flare came from the sun, a big solar flare, like that electromagnetic, whatever that is, that energy, that pulse of magnetism would fry our whole electrical grid. And, we don't have backup systems prepared for that. There's no system for making that ride be fun. We'd be in big trouble. The military would have to be deployed. People would have to be told to stay in their homes. Oh, wait, sounds familiar. But given, certain hot topics at the moment, that probably wouldn't be too fun. A lot of people would be skeptical of what's going on, and wondering whether it really was a natural event or whether we'd just been shut down. But nonetheless, so that'd be an example of how we would be in big trouble, like food shortages, energy shortages, communication, how would we talk to each other? The government, it's all based upon, sending emails and phones. What if none of that works? We have to go back to writing letters. That adapting to that would be very difficult. And so for all our advancement, in a way, we need to be humble and realize it wouldn't take much to set us back to the Stone Age. And so similar, that's basically what happened to Rome. And Ireland was the part where they had Rome hadn't invaded and taken over, but they had the right next to the Roman Empire, and there was nothing. It was just the Atlantic Ocean on one side, the Roman Empire on the other, right? And so they preserved the knowledge of the literacy that had bloomed through the Roman Empire and those traditions, while it was also being maintained in the East, in the Byzantine Empire. But and Ireland then eventually, started building monasteries, the Irish, in Scotland and England and Belgium and France and all over the place, and colonizing with literacy, basically spreading Christianity, but also spreading knowledge of, reading and writing, and all the knowledge that reading and writing was the vessel for: the philosophy, the medicine, the political science, or the history of what's been happening. And so this was spread through the Irish. And that was part of the development out of the Dark Ages into, kind of the high medieval era, where, and general flourishing, the people in the cathedral building, there was favorable weather conditions, and society was coming up. Prosperity, the basic organization of society was improving. The Vikings come in and throw a wrench in the works, and they start, basically causing a lot of problems, and just killing people, raping people, burning down everything, and taking control. Or what they do is ask for a Dane guild, the Danes did anyway, saying basically, give us a bunch of treasure and it's extortion money, or else we're going to attack you. And so that happened for a while. Eventually they took over England. They also took over northern France. The descendants of those Vikings, the French king was eventually like, hey, one group of Vikings, I will let you keep northern France. You will be the Duke of Normandy if you fight off those other freaking Vikings who keep attacking us, right? And so this group, Rollo, the Viking, and his kind of followers, like, yeah, that sounds like a sweet deal. And so they became, pretty sure that's exactly a direct quote. Yo, that's a pretty sweet deal, man. I know they're speaking Norse, but that's what they said. It's incredible. So And then they, after a few generations of being the Dukes of Normandy, they're kind of taking over little areas around in Normandy, being pretty warlike, funnily enough, who they're given their ancestry. And eventually they invaded England. And you had a Norwegian king trying to, the King of England died. You've got the local Anglo-Saxons elect there, who were who were descended from the Angles and the Saxons, who were Germanic tribes from like northwest Germany and southern Denmark. They had moved over when the Romans left Britain because they're like, oh, the empire's getting stretched thin. They pulled out before the empire collapsed. They pulled out from Britain. And so you have these Angles and Saxons coming into Britain. And that's where we get the term Anglo-Saxon. There's a mix of these two Germanic tribes. They have 7 kingdoms, 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Eventually they're all conquered by Vikings, except for one, Wessex, in the west of England, where Alfred the Great, the only English king to ever be called the Great, he was the one who managed to not be conquered by the Vikings and control the southwest of England. Eventually, his son would be, I think, Ethelred, was called the first king of England. Similar to Julius Caesar, Alfred the Great was basically the first king of England, but technically not. And so those Anglo-Saxons, they reconquered and eventually have the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of England. It's one kingdom, took over everything else. Whereas previously you'd had Northumberland and Mercia and Essex and Sussex, etc., different kingdoms. He reconquers these Viking kingdoms. At some point, 1066, the king of Edward the Confessor dies. Maybe it might have been the year before. And then you have the king, Harald Hardrada from Norway, wants to take over, reassert Viking control. Local Anglo-Saxons elect their own king, Harold Godwinson, to take over. Duke of Normandy is like, nah, man, I've been promised this by Edward the Confessor. Don't know why he would do that, but apparently that was the case. So they all go in. The upshot is the Vikings defeated by the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons march straight down to meet the Normans coming in at the south, and that, the Normans win and they take over England. And so that's where, there's a lot of French in English, because the kings of England were speaking French for a couple hundred years. That was their first language. They started learning English as a second language. And eventually French became the second language. And so that's where, England, there was the situation of England through medieval era. They eventually conquer Ireland, alas. And I guess some good things came from that, but probably I would go out on a limb and say mostly it was probably a negative for civilization and spiritual flourishing of the planet. But who's to say? The Zen master says, we shall see. Who knows? I guess it's created a good story anyway, despite suffering. So, you have Ireland kind of pushing back against the English for 800 years. Give and take, goes back and forth quite a bit. The English kind of keep control until 1920-ish, when the Irish, I should know this, was it 1921? I think the Free State was announced, so the Irish have a war of independence and get rid of the English. But all right, so so the medieval era, we have all these kingdoms. They keep developing. Eventually, you have the Renaissance around 1500-ish, and that's the rebirth, the Renaissance. So all the massive increase of interest and capacity for the arts. And in Europe, so in Italy, with the Medici family, etc., kind of patronizing the arts, so giving money and funds, etc., for artistic works, and a renewal of interest in Roman philosophy and Greek philosophy and all this sort of stuff. And so society becomes more conscious, start developing intellectually and culturally or artistically. And this happened in France and England, all over of Europe, right? You have the Renaissance. That kind of turned into the early modern period, right, where you start getting more technology, like guns and people blowing up castles with cannons and whatnot. And I guess that'd be even late medieval period that was happening. The age of, then kind of have the age of discovery where Europeans, where they're quite developed. They've got, of course, there was a Black Death in the middle of the medieval era, which kind of reset them quite a bit. Climate problems, the drop in the temperature, significant drop. Harvests failed, people's immune systems got damaged. They were malnourished, and then disease swept through and took a lot of them out. That seems the most plausible explanation for what happened. But nonetheless, Europe had been overall, kind of on this upward trajectory through a combination of naval technology, good quality ships, and gunpowder. Portugal and Spain kind of spread around the world, kind of take over a lot of places. The Dutch copy them after a while and start building their own empires. So you take the land off the natives, you make them give you taxes, you start growing sugar and things like that in the fertile land, which is stuff you couldn't grow in Europe. You sell it back to the European population, make a lot of money, reinvest that in more ships, keep expanding the empire, that kind of thing. Slavery, slave trade, which was happening all around the world, right? It wasn't just in Europe. The Islamic world was doing it all through Africa. They were enslaving each other, and people would kidnap people and sell them to other parts of Africa, Asia, although North America, South America, slavery was the norm for a long time. And indeed still exists today, unfortunately. So although at least the prevailing view is that it's wrong, which is good at least, right? Whereas it was just accepted back then. So these empires develop, and over hundreds of, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, European empires are expanding. England starts a bit later than the others, and France. But I think 1600, they've got Jamestown in Virginia, which for the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth I. So they develop North America. The French are in North America, modern day Quebec, French Canada. Je me souviens. So they are developing, these overseas empires, and then meanwhile the Islamic empire has grown enormously. The Ottoman Empire over North Africa and Middle East, and you have China, the Chinese civilization, very, very advanced civilization. Throughout this whole period, kind of fluctuations, breaking apart, coming together, but very, very prosperous and advanced in terms of medicine and philosophy and all kinds of things. India, similar thing. I don't know too much about the details, but throughout all this period, they had countless different civilizations. India is like Europe. It's like 50 different languages, more than 50 languages, but 50 big languages or something, like huge. It really is similar to Europe. Very large, many more people than Europe these days, at least, and different climates, different ethnicities. People look black in the South, almost similar to Aboriginal Australians or people from, Polynesians or something. And then in the North, people look very different. They look almost like Europeans, some of them. So India, all these different civilizations developing, very, very advanced, especially in terms of spirituality. It's famous for this, right? The yoga and Buddhism. So you have Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. I don't know much about that, but it's got a good name anyway. I'll give them that. Sikhism later on, but anyway, and so that's developing. Eventually, all these places, India is taken over by the British eventually. So the English had united with the Scottish crown because there was no heir to the English throne. The King of Scotland was related to them, and so he was the next heir. So he took over the throne of England. It became one big country. And so you have the British Empire, not just the English Empire. And France took over, all the European empires, took over a lot of Africa, all of South America and North America. South America, of course, mostly Portuguese and Spanish. And even China around the turn of the 20th century, so 1900, early 1900s, there was the Boxer Rebellion, where even they were being basically the European powers were putting them under a lot of pressure and trying to take over. But then the Japanese ended up doing that, actually. And the Japanese took over, they invaded and, this would be in the 20th century, Chinese fought them off, mostly the communists fighting them off. And then the communists eventually took over after the Civil War in China. And they remain in power to this day, although it's not really communism anymore. It'd be more fascism, not like Nazism, which is like this whole racist fascism, but like fascism as it came from Italy with Mussolini, a fusion of corporations and the state. Basically, kind of capitalism, except there are these big corporations who are friends with the government, so it's easier for them. So it's not quite competitive. It's not really balanced. You have these big monopolies, and the government likes it that way because they can tell them what to do, control the economy through them, and easy to regulate life and control. And also the government can always, whenever they want, can just nationalize stuff. Oh, we're just going to take that from you. Yeah, you're in jail now. We own your thing. Or you're still the boss, but we own it, you know. So that would be modern, as an aside, modern China. And Chinese people are great. I love the Chinese people. I love everyone. The system, I would say that doesn't quite feel like the best system. A topic for another podcast. Sure, there's some benefits to having complete power over people, but I would say it's really not actually a great idea overall. So we have, moving into the modern period, European empires have taken over all the world. Basically, you get to, the 20th century, and a lot of people start asking for their freedom. In World War, so you have the Industrial Revolution, 1770 to kind of 1840-ish, where the development of machines, beginning in England through steam power, mostly in coal, burning coal, and with steam you can turn motors, you can make things, electricity, you can make things move, right? So was that what they're doing? We're doing with electricity, or was it just steam moving wheels and making things move? I'm not sure. But if you have steam, you can move a motor. And if you've got a magnet, like, what is it? Magnetic current going this way, or magnetic field, electric current going that way, you create a force this way at right angles to them. So anyway, they started developing machines, right? Industrial Revolution, the second Industrial Revolution, like 100 years later or so, late 1800s, up till the First World War, which was 1914, where it was just like another level of more mechanization, widespread dissemination of railways and telegraph and communications and transport technology, and advancement of machine building and factories and production lines, mass production. So you have these phenomena kind of globalizing the world, bringing everything together, and allowing more centralized control by these nation states, which they have become, rather than being kind of the vague idea of the country, but it's kind of the king is, and the family is kind of more important practically, to no, actually, soldiers are under Napoleon or whatever. Yeah, sure, they're fired up by Napoleon, but they're thinking about like the French Republic or the French Empire or whatever. It's this abstract idea, and it's just coming to the modern age of nation states, where we have our allegiance to whatever, the flag or the nation, rather than individual people. But so World War One, in a nutshell, all this that's a whole other topic, how that began. But in a nutshell, all these European royal families, who are all each other's cousins, sent millions of young men to, I know you've got that fiance and she's really beautiful and she really loves you, but we really think it would be better if you just got your head blown off over there. So let's do it. Here we go. And that happened to like 50 million men or something. There's the patriarchy at work. Stupid men always getting their heads blown off. I mean, there's some truth to both sides. However, something a lot of poor young men had to suffer in that period of history. So hopefully we've learned that lesson. So World War II, then again, Japan had already begun attacking China. Then you have all the stuff in Europe between. There's a pretty good argument that Germany was blamed for World War One, and Germany had been quite militaristic. It had been a later empire rising when the whole world's been taken over already by all the other European states. Germany unified. It was like the descendants of the Holy Roman Empire. It was like all these small kingdoms, and then eventually in 1871 they unified as Germany under the Prussians, who were very, very militaristic and organized. And so they took over. You had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is the descendant from the Holy Roman Empire, but further to the south. They were kind of controlling the Balkans and stuff. But Germany, kind of north, like modern day Germany, they arrived on the scene, and they industrialized very, very, very quickly, and so became a rival to England. And that was World War One, all this jealousy and intrigue and suspicion and ambition and yada yada yada. So we have this war, everyone blowing each other apart, and then Germany was blamed for that. Although there's a good argument, I would say, that everyone was equally to blame. Something which might be relevant to modern wars. I think it's not you're right and we are wrong. wait a minute. Who says that? We are right and you're wrong. And they say, no, we are right and you're wrong. Maybe you're both wrong. Maybe you've both been doing bad things. Maybe forgiveness is required to have any kind of peace. And maybe you're more wrong than I am, or vice versa, but who really cares? Why can't we just say, hey, let's try to, move in the right direction? So so World War II was blamed on Germany. World War I was blamed on Germany, and they had the Treaty of Versailles. They had to pay reparations. They had to pay enormous amounts of money to rebuild France, basically, and Belgium, etc., where the trench warfare had just ravaged areas. It was terrible. So Germany wasn't able. They was in the post-war years. They were in a really bad situation and absolutely, disgraced, humiliated. But no matter how much they worked, it wasn't going to be better anytime soon. And then you have this, Adolf Hitler appearing on the scene saying, "Hey, this isn't fair." Like, yeah, that's what I was feeling, and yeah, and let's take over the world. I mean, let's just retake our own sovereignty. That's all. Oh yeah, cool. And so you have extremism appearing in Germany, exploiting the unfairness of the Treaty of Versailles. And then eventually, he rearms Germany and starts expanding and having a militaristic expansionist policy. And look, that's obviously despicable. And so rightly, people wanted to stop that and liberate the countries that had been conquered and had their freedom taken away. But the roots of it were in World War One. Well, I mean, it's very complicated. That's one analysis of it. So, and then, World War II kind of ends, and we have this period of where, international institutions being brought together to try to avoid bigger wars ever again. And, you continue to have smaller wars here, there, and everywhere, but and civil wars. But that would be the nutshell coming up to the modern day. So World War I was 1939 to 1945. World War I was 1914 to 1918. World War II, 1939 to 1945. So second half of the 20th century, enormous advances in technology and culture, and which we haven't really talked about yet, but changes in culture, and that's how and why things change. And so that kind of brings us up to the modern day, where you have Europe divided into many smaller nation states. Their empires now, in the Americas, in Africa in the 20th century, mostly they broke off and took independence. Although one might wonder whether they're still wink, wink, nudge, nudge, kind of under the thumb through kind of hidden financial arrangements and support for dictators through certain organizations or certain private relationships with the former colonial powers. Just saying, seems like some evidence for that. And China, of course, in 1949 or so, becoming the communists taking power. The nationalists, who were kind of, fascists, essentially. I guess that's kind of ironic that the communists turned into what the nationalists were, but they were, kind of market, based, similar to the Europeans were supporting them, the nationalists in the civil war in China. They were basically, capitalism and European style kind of, trying to control, create a nation, but allowing people to buy and sell stuff and, do the normal thing. But I believe, there wasn't rule of law and fairness. So they retreated to Taiwan. which was part of China at the time. And that's the whole issue now, is they're descended from the Kuomintang, the nationalists, and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, who had the Red Army or whatever. They took power and became the modern so the People's Republic of China, right? And then invaded Tibet and etc. But otherwise have been basically where they are now. And over time, they turned away from communism in the 20th century. In the 70s, Deng Xiaoping, I think it was, the premier of China, made a deal with, I think it was Nixon, president of the United States, saying, okay, we'll open up this Shenzhen, was it? Special economic zone in the south of China. We'll open up this area where American corporations can come in and basically screw over the American workers and just come here and move well, that's a simplistic analysis, but yeah, nonetheless, basically shift jobs off to China and develop things there. And so that kickstarted the Chinese economy. And then they spread that idea of, okay, this was very successful to throughout, and slowly but surely, China turned into basically a fascist state, meaning capitalism, but with heavy state control and the cultivation of monopolies. So that the state, the political party, and one political party, not a democracy, can control the state while allowing the engine of capitalism to make it viable economically, whereas communism hadn't been. In the Soviet Union and communist China, it was poverty, it was terrible, and that absolutely undermined the power of the dictators. Russia in 1917 had a revolution where the Romanovs were basically overthrown and murdered, and the communists took over. It was a civil war where the kind of other European countries tried to reinstate the capitalist, not democratic, but more traditionalist society. But the communists won that war, and they created the Soviet Union, which then, read the Gulag Archipelago if you want to cry. I haven't read it yet, but apparently that's a recipe for sadness and understanding of the dangers of communism. I guess we can go into that in another episode regarding politics. But and so that eventually fell in around 1991. Yeah, I believe, yeah, late 1991, maybe October or something. Who cares what month, right? But the Soviet Union fell, and for various reasons, but probably the primary one being it wasn't aligned with reality and wisdom. It didn't really work, and so then it became you have basically the mafia, the mob, kind of were running Russia for a long time, and kind of like similar to the fall of the Roman Empire, we have these local warlords who just take over. Whoever's got the most guys with sticks and is best at organizing people into, applying those said guys with sticks to, asserting control, whether they're good or bad, those people tended to become the new government. And so you have that, and then, morphing into the modern oligarchic Russian state, where essentially it's a capitalist democracy. However, democracy, doesn't really seem like it. Seems like more of a charade of democracy, or maybe democracy for if it's about kind of fairly superficial issues. However, if someone wants to be running for office and changing anything really significant, then they're going to be plucked. That little weed in the garden, as they will be perceived by the state, the oligarchs will be plucked. We don't want that growing here. You're messing up our garden. Look at all these beautiful palaces we're growing, so largely an oligarchy, modern Russia, meaning a small group of people have a lot of economic control and thus political control. However, to be fair, I would say that's fairly accurate of the United States of America also. Federal Reserve, holler at your boy, yikes. These corporations where you could say is an oligarchy. You could also say it's fairly close to fascism. Again, I love America. I love all these countries. I love Russia. It's very interesting. China, very interesting. But governments, even all the people in the government, hey, we're brothers. And the way I see it, you're my brother or sister, we're all just human beings, we're all just souls incarnating in these bodies. And I don't want to judge anyone on that level, or reject anyone on that level and cut them off from that feeling of fraternity, and love, how and ever. Yeah, I do think it's very important to point out when you think systems aren't healthy. So I would say, unfortunately, America's lost its way. So now we haven't mentioned America yet. In 1776, they, so I guess just around the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, they broke free from British control over various reasons, but largely they just wanted freedom. And the King of England was just, could go around and do whatever he wanted with it. And they were like, oh, we don't really like that. And that basically is a society of, there's a lot of land, and like they had, of course, taken a bunch of that land from Native Americans. A lot of it they had bought from them earlier on, but then later on, once they were established, they started screwing them over pretty intense and taking over and, genociding people and all kinds of stuff. Nonetheless, the 13 colonies that first became the United States, I don't know if any of them had what their relationships were with Native Americans. I don't know if any of the crimes had been committed at that point. I'm not sure. Definitely they had slaves, but everyone had slaves in the world. So I think it's important, a thing we're going to talk about later, probably in a part 2, because this is long enough. I did say it would be short, but you probably didn't believe me. Very wise. You knew it. Is that, an important thing with history is being aware that, I think, that we bring our own context to bear on it when we're thinking about it, but that things improve, and that's good. And the fact that we now, want to tear down statues of these, former heroes. I mean, I don't want to tear them down, but some people do. That is, in a way, is a sign. It's a good sign. It's like, oh yeah, we're becoming more aware of that. Yeah, that was wrong. Certain things were wrong. However, you need to be aware that in the future, people are going to do that to us, and and that's good in a way that they will be criticizing us, because that means that will have been progress. If they weren't criticizing us, well, that would probably, like, are we perfect? You really think we're perfect? That wouldn't be good either, because then what's the point? If there's no evolution, no room for growth. So the thing is, we are not perfect, and people in the future, things going well, they will notice our imperfections and point them out, and hopefully they won't be hating us for our flaws, and hopefully they'll have enough self-consciousness to realize they too are flawed, and people in their future are going to, kind of criticize and point out their flaws, as rightly so. So I think, it's important to notice the flaws of the people in the past, but also their virtues, and to be fair and gracious. Yeah. So, but yeah, so it was a slave owning society, although the United States, the 13 colonies, they almost included in the Constitution the abolition of slavery straight up. I believe this is what, however, I think one or two colonies, the 13 colonies that became in a conspiracy, right? Wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was a real conspiracy. They secretly formed a new government and then broke free of the British Empire and fought a war and won. But I think one or two of those colonies said no. In the South more, they said no, like, we don't agree to that. And they had all agreed in this conference, like, look, we need to be unified if we're going to do any of this. And they came very close to losing. So imagine if they weren't as unified as they were. And then the British Empire, America was like the cradle for modern democracy, that was the model, and it worked really well. And so then people in Britain were like, shouldn't we be copying them? The king's like, well, I guess. Wait, you want society to flourish, don't you, Your Highness? Yeah. Well, maybe that's a cynical way to look at it, but who knows? But nonetheless, there was a minority of the colonies who they said, no, we don't agree. And so they said, we're only going to put things into this constitution if it's unanimous. And so they said, okay, well, that's very unfortunate, but fine, we won't include that. We won't abolish slavery. And I believe that's the case. I might be wrong, but so now nonetheless they became independent, and then after, and then basically I would say we could go deeper into analyzing them, but up until the introduction of the Federal Reserve, well, there's a lot of shenanigans going on. I don't know the details, but between the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, which was like 1860s ish, cowboy kind of era, maybe the cowboy era was a little bit before, but there's the war where a bunch of people in the South were like, hey, no, we're not, the federal government said we're abolishing slavery. People in the South said, no, we don't like that. We're seceding. This is meant to be, and although I disagree with them in that, I think that to some extent they do have a point in that, well, I don't know the details, but that America was intended to be the United States. It wasn't meant to be one country. It was states. They were meant to be decentralized. And they were saying, no, like you can't tell us to do that. You can do that maybe in your own states, but federally you can't do that. I don't know the legal details, but either way, of course, I don't agree with slavery. So I'm happy that they didn't win the war, but nonetheless, they had a tussle there, right? They had their war between the North and the South over the issue of slavery. And Lincoln, I think, was quoted as saying, I don't give a damn about the slaves, but I care about the Union. I want to maintain this country. Allegedly, he said that. So now, nonetheless, they won, and hallelujah, slavery is abolished. Although, I say at that point there definitely was a lot of systemic racism, and it was through laws they managed to kind of somewhat continue the disempowerment of the African Americans. These days, I would say again, look, I'm sure there's a lot of not slavery, but racism. But I think America's made a lot of progress actually. So good job for that progress, especially in the 20th century. I think the civil rights and the 60s, like the music, and there's a lot of awareness raised. So I think it's moving in a good direction anyway, hopefully. So now let's see. So we've come up to the modern age more or less, and that's probably not too mysterious what was happening recently. So let's see here. Shall we get into the details here, how things change? Well, I would say we might end it there, and I'm going to continue this in a part 2. So that was the overview of like world history, right? And well, no, it can't be done. It must be, because I did promise some juicy details about certain missing information in the story. Okay, so look, why do things change? How do they change? I'm going to name some principles, some factors. However, some of these, there's some overlap, right? So, but nonetheless, it's useful to think of it in this way. So socio-cultural change, or social change, cultural change, kind of separate. Ecological change, economic change, military change, or phenomena in these categories. So, of course, ecological change is some area. Africa was very, very green during Egypt. Even when these pyramids were there, I believe it was green. Definitely, maybe not the modern pyramids, but possibly, but definitely a lot of the old temples, the Osirion and all this kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure it's quite established that the Egypt was green when they had a lot of this advanced architecture. Can you imagine, like, just flowing canals? And you can, Ramsey, that's interesting. Okay. So, and Africa in general, West Africa, where now, or Central Africa, where it's like deserts, the Sahara Desert was lakes and grasslands, right? Not that long ago, I think even 5,000 years ago, this was the case. So, of course, when climate changes, right, where it gets colder, you have ice ages. We've had like 5 ice ages or something in well, not history, but global history, right? Like including prehistory. And, when suddenly things start desertifying, maybe you're farming too much and not putting enough goodness back into the earth. And so you're starting the deserts, and then that spreads, because there's a negative feedback loop of it reduces the water in the atmosphere. It reduces rainfall if you over farm. If you keep building into the land, that you have enough trees and animals on the land, and you're actually increasing the soil, then you can increase rainfall. But people didn't know this necessarily throughout history. So there was man-made climate change, and also just natural climate change. And so that caused the rise and fall of a lot of civilizations. And believe it seems like there's some very advanced civilization, for example, in like West Africa. Like they talk about, I can't remember the name, but they would call themselves the Star People or something, I think. And they had a lot of really seeming advanced knowledge about like, crazy kind of stuff like astronomy or even, scientific sort of stuff. And it's kind of, so there are some quite mysteries there about that. But anyway, it seems like climate change might have done them in. And, so ecological forces can cause societies to change. They can, maybe, the old gods, someone says, oh yeah, the old gods have failed you. The new gods will help. Oh, really? Okay. So when these kind of crises come, people can exploit them. So it kind of creates an opening for novelty to emerge. Also, perhaps just a purification process of old culture. If you had a healthy kind of way of looking at things, and then it starts to kind of ossify or kind of starts to turn a bit wrong, and then some ecological challenge, that might actually just kind of burn off all the nonsense. And they go, oh, we need to return to the real stuff, and pulls the society together. People align with what's right and useful and true and beautiful and good. And so that could happen. Or it could cause evolution of culture, where there's a pressure, and so the people are forced to try to adapt. By culture, I would mean our ideas, our ideas and actions regarding what is and what ought to be. So, in the modern day, you could say science tells us a lot about what is, but nothing really about what ought to be. Whereas, philosophy, or for some people, religion would, or spirituality or whatever, or television would tell you how to live. So cultural changes can come through ecological changes, or people can just naturally, stories develop. Oh yeah. People work on, ancient Greek tragedy, the plays. Oh, wow, it makes people think about things. They talk about things. And so there's a feedback loop between art and experience, right? And art is meant to show this is what we're doing. And then people go, oh yeah, that is what we're doing. And we can hopefully learn something from it. And it's not just for fun, but for helping us live in alignment. It's an educational thing. And then we live in greater alignment with harmony and truth and wisdom. And then we create new art from that higher gear. And then that feedback tells us, oh yeah, right. And that allows us to catapult to a higher level. Or if it's not done right, or if bad people take over or whatever, then maybe it goes regressive, slowly down the slope, I don't know. And so economic change, of course, it could be through technological innovation. So the kind of material culture, the way people do things, that could cause, technological improvements can cause cultural change. Wait, what am I saying? Economic, yeah. So if people have greater wealth, you can, more people have time to be thinking. The ancient Greeks, one argument is that because of slavery, you had a bunch of people who were able to just sit around and think instead of working, and that's kind of caused them to, take their culture in perhaps a more enlightened direction. It's kind of crazy idea, but perhaps there was some sort of alchemical transformation of, the injustice of slavery somehow being redeemed through, to some extent at least, through that coal being pressed, squeezed in the intellectual, I don't know, the whatever, the intellectual whatever of ancient Greek civilization, and turning into their quite useful and enlightened philosophy and art and all kinds of architecture and things which we quite appreciate. But you know, I guess they could have done it without the slavery, I would say, but it seems Egypt didn't seem to have slaves, at least in its more advanced earlier period. So I would say you don't need it. But definitely. But so what else? Why can things change? So yeah, and you know, social change, cultural and social. It's kind of similar, but I would say culture is, you know, our ideas and behavior regarding well, our ideas about what's, you know, right and wrong and what's true and false. So what is and what ought to be. And then our behavior is kind of the manifestation of that. Our behavior. This is our customs. This is what we do. That's our culture. Society, I guess, would be the imprint or the fusion between the culture and the nature, the ecology, and including the nature of humans and just the way that human psychology works. The interplay of these things. The society is, you could say, oh, there's a lot of inequality in society. But you couldn't say there's a lot of inequality in our culture, right? So society is somewhat more of a densification, a condensation of the culture, the more abstract thinking and acting out of those thoughts, and thinking out of the actions. And so, yeah, societies, you know, the way if you change the, oh, okay, we're going to have a priesthood, or they're going to be paid, or they're not going to be paid. It's, you know, or they're going to be wandering monks. That kind of social organization can change the culture. It can change the way the ideas develop. But largely, I guess it's a result of the culture and the, you know, the nature, how much food people have, like what kind of climate is it, like what do people like to do, how do they act. I guess there's a lot of mysterious interplays there. And technological, of course, can affect social organization. Like, you know, the invention of steam trains and cars and stuff obviously changes the way there's less human interaction. Like these days, you know, like the lockdowns would not have been possible, right, if we hadn't had such advanced technology, both communications technology, being able to work from home, and also, you know, say medical technology, being able to say, oh, we need to just build more hospitals. And 100 years ago, people would have just said, guess we better get some vitamin D and get some exercise and positive thinking and not freak out too much. Yes, here are the dangers. Very serious problem as far as we know, in April 2020. Maybe not in July 2020 or September 2020, but yeah, still serious, but maybe a different kind of problem. But so this technology allowed us social changes, and throughout history, you know, technology improving has allowed, you know, the Roman road building technology allowed the expansion of their empire that created this kind of cosmopolitan culture where North African culture is mixing with Italian, with Greek, with British, and, you know, so there are feedback loops between these processes. Political and military change. So politics is basically how we, a mechanism for competing and cooperating in the pursuit of guiding social evolution, or guiding our participation in history. So how are we going to organize? Yeah, organization, right? It's a way of organizing society through competition and cooperation. Avoiding violence, that would be politics, right? Political violence is kind of really, you're leaving the field of politics. Politics is the idea that we can kind of talk about these things. If you're not talking, then that's really military activity. So political violence, really, I guess, is kind of oxymoron, because it's basically like militarism. So of course, that feeds the political class. If they get very wealthy, if the political class are you know, priests, and they're taking their medicine, you know, they're taking their magic potions. Most ancient civilizations were taking entheogens, or you know, psilocybin mushrooms, or ergot, you know, or ayahuasca, or blue lotus in Egypt, and it seems like maybe DMT and maybe opium, or I don't know, whatever. Throughout history, soma, you know, there have been these things. So if you have a priesthood that is grounded in the psychedelic experience, then it's going to be harder for them to to start exploiting people. There are cases like, the Aztecs where they were taking psilocybin mushrooms and slaughtering tens of thousands of people on pyramids. So it can go that way, it seems. But in general, it's a force for grounding the consciousness in reality and lucidity and kindness. So that could have political effects. Well, that political arrangement could have cultural effects, social effects, economic effects. Whereas tyranny, when that arises, can change things in a much more negative direction. Military stuff. One person just really has a big ego, wants to take over. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, I think, apparently killed 10% of the people who were alive at the time. Is that right? Something like that. Allegedly killed enough people that it altered, was it something crazy, like it significantly altered the biomass of the planet, or I can't remember what it is, something nuts, right? He's also the progenitor to like 10% of modern Mongolians or something, like, so that guy, he was on a certain path, and they can just come out of nowhere, and so that obviously changes history. And you also have, maybe a weak military, the Roman military getting a bit weak. If someone had maybe had the right cultural aspirations, we're like, I feel this is crumbling, we should really protect this so we can continue to flourish with prosperity and art and all this stuff, rather than degenerating into some sort of barbarism, by which you might mean a more simple, animalistic expression of humanity, where people don't have enough material comforts to expand their minds to the point where they touch their heart and they can be respectful to each other. So I guess barbaric, I do believe there's such a thing as barbaric culture. It's not all equal, right? Not all foods are equal. Not all trees are as beautiful as others. They're all beautiful. Not all as beautiful as each other. Some are more beautiful. Not all people are as interesting. Not all people are as good at football. Not all people are as wise as each other. Not all people are, like as good at languages. Can't speak any, Hungarian, so I'm at the bottom of the rung, Hungarian. And what was the original point? We're saying, yes, barbarism, right? And so certain cultures, I would say, hey, it's a culture, it's doing their thing, but I do believe there can be unhealthy cultures, like, hey, that's discrimination. Well, what about Nazi Germany? Isn't that kind of bad? Yes. Oh yeah, right. So clearly the whole point, if there's good, there must be bad, right? So now, and there are degrees of this. So of course, so military change can affect these things. So these are some ways that history can evolve and move forward. You have just life expressing itself through, and small little changes, individual lives, the life of a family, the life of a community, the life of a city, the life of a region, the life of the country, the kingdom, empire. You have these changes going on, and we could talk about them, analyze them in the ways we've just talked about, and they interact and they have feedback loops, wheels within wheels, deals within squeals, and spheres within fears, within merely whatever. So we can see like how things could change. You don't just have a status quo. At the bare minimum, nature is always changing. And so society, individuals, everyone, civilizations, all the way down to the individual level of a person, you need to be adapting. You can't wear the same clothes in summer as you wear in, I'm wearing shorts. You don't know that, but I'm wearing shorts, So you got to adapt. And so this is part of history. There are these seasons, these great seasons of things changing based on various factors. Some would even say that it's based upon astronomical factors, and that you have a great year, you've got the Kali Yuga and the blah, blah, blah Yuga, based upon the precession of the equinox, I guess. And every 26,000 years, the earth rotates. There's a slight wobble in the rotation of the earth. So where north is pointing isn't always in the same direction. Where north points actually draws a circle over a period of 26,000 years, 25,800 or something like that. It's called the Great Year. If you're interested, look up Randall Carlson talking about this and sacred geometry and yeah, the precession of the equinox, or Graham Hancock's work. He talks about it a lot. Where are his books? Here, with 2 books, I think. Anyway, so and some people would say that the energetic imprint, like everything's connected vibration wise, right? Modern physics agrees with this, right? Everything. So you have a snapshot. If you imagine a slice, cross section of the universe, you know, like let's say the 4th dimension, let's say it's time. That's one understanding of it, I believe. You know, I'm here. So if you're watching YouTube, you can see my face moving comically. But so, or if you're just listening and you hear my voice, either way, I'm not doing all those things simultaneously, but all of those things exist in history. So that you could say is kind of like a line of this and then that and that. So time is kind of like the 4th dimension. The 3rd dimension is being expressed in slices now. And so some people would argue that the cross section of that process, the slice of time when you were born, or when even throughout when you live, but that the configuration of planets and stars and things, all the vibration and energy and interrelations of them, especially when you're factor into it that there's good reason to think they are conscious. These are conscious entities, even if you think they're not conscious entities. And I don't know they are, but it seems to make sense to me upon yeah, a reflection. So, but even if they're not, you know, vibration wise, that is affecting you, right? There's a different vibrational harmony or overlaying of vibrations and fields at that time compared to other times. So some people would say that this also affects thinking, behavior, health, all kinds of things. And that part of history, the seasons of history, are also built upon the stars and the movements of the stars. So chew on that one, huh? I guess I still am, you know. I think I should have got my mummy bird to chew it up a bit more for me. It's kind of overwhelming sometimes, these delicious yet challenging chunks of gnosis. So yeah, okay. Now, so we're talking about history. I gave you the overview, very brief overview of what has happened in known history. And then now we just talked about why things change, you know, and the various ways to understand it. And of course, I guess I could just quickly cap that off by mentioning, of course, on the individual level, we're animals which have evolved with avoidance mechanisms and approach mechanisms. Oh, that's good. I want it. Go get it. Oh, that's bad. Run away from that. Or even if it's an approach thing of like, oh, this thing is bad, I must kill it. You know, should I run away? No, I think I need to kill this thing now. So there's even that is approach, right? But you go to it. So this is based, you know, the animals that didn't have these things didn't evolve, right? That this is, or even if you think that there's some hyper intelligent energy guiding evolution, I think probably there is, actually, to be candid. That even if there weren't, right, it would make sense that, or even if there isn't, it would make sense that they're just the organisms which don't have that are not going to thrive, and they're going to be outcompeted in the gene pool. So this is our basic reality. This is how our biologically how we work. So in the modern day, in history, or just throughout history, people want things that, you know, their mind or their body or their emotions consider and interpret to be good, and they, you know, avoid things they think are bad. And so on a basic level, you have humans doing this, and then that influences what families are doing. There could be dramas of someone wants this, someone else doesn't want it, because you've got different interpretations. You kind of got these wars of interpretations and ambitions and desire and avoidance, you know. And meanwhile, consciousness just chilling, watching everything, or sleeping through it from every angle, which is very interesting. But you still got the family, and then that's going to determine what the family does as a whole. Does the family invest in this? Does the family stay together? Does the family create this thing? Do they all go to this party? Or so you have these individual consciousnesses in the groups of a family or a circle of friends, where it can generate outcomes, kind of almost a democratic thing, voting almost in the overall flow of action and motivation. And so they combine, you have all these things out there in the world. You have individuals, but also the groups, which are the kind of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but these kind of like, epiphenomenal agents, right, of groups. And then you also have, so on upward, right? Like reverse turtle move, so on upward. You've got groups of groups, and, why is the Russian military attacking Ukraine and, the Ukrainian military and, potentially the Ukrainian people? I don't really know the details, but you'd have to assume it's happening at least part of the time. But this terrible situation. Why is that happening? Is it just Putin? Is it just one person? Or is it also groups of groups, and groups with their motivations? What do people mostly want? Some people are like, no, this feels wrong. Other people are like, well, I don't know, for this reason, I think we should. And then the overall, maybe one group says, overall, most people are like, no, we're protesting. We're not doing this. And then the other group of groups is like, are we going to persecute them or are we just going to let it happen? But then that's going to tumble up our whole plans. And then, so you have these different levels of kind of like wheels within wheels, like individuals, circles of individuals, circles of circles. And they're all kind of got their biologically ingrained mechanisms of avoidance and approach. And so we have this flow of energy of what's happening. And it's all kind of just pulsing out from the blissful heart of God. No, is it not? Let me know in the comments. Not you, God. I know you know what's going on. I mean, like the God as you were expressed through individuals who maybe are skeptical. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. Good. Great to know we're on the same book. I mean, page or line. Now, so okay, moving on there. So, biases. So when we're studying history, so now we've talked about the overview and then why and how things change. But when we're studying history, we need to be aware there are a few problems. So one is biases. People have biases, or biases. They are biased. They, again, they want some things, they don't want other things. And this can affect your honesty with yourself and with others. So, I want to have my little, I've got this beautiful homestead thing, got a lovely wife and family, and it's really, I've found the peace I've always been looking for and I didn't have with my parents or whatever, blah, 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 whatever, some hypothetical situation of some chap in, 1620. But the thing is, the king really wants me to write this biography of some guy from 200 years ago, and to make him look like a bad guy because his descendants are his political enemies now. So I need to kind of smear his whole family. And he's telling me to burn these other books. And he's telling me to ignore the books that are in circulation that I can't burn. I have to just ignore them and whatever. This kind of stuff would happen all the time because the king wants something and he thinks it's fair enough to lie and bend the truth, and he's not trying to do a bad thing. He's by definition approaching what he thinks is good in his interpretation, but there's a different interpretation, which is, well, no, the truth is the most important thing. You should just follow the truth and not be a dick, So, and what is that guy going to just go, well, okay, I guess I'm just going to get the king angry at me and then I lose my whole family, beautiful family situation, or I'm just going to go with the flow and go, hey, history's long and interesting. It's only 1620. I'm just going to let it go. So then now you could be reading that book and going, oh, wow, that's what happened, huh? It's like, we don't know. There's bias now and there's been bias throughout history. So, and then so you got bias where people are lying to you, lying to others, and then also lying to themselves, right? Trying to like repressing stuff or subconsciously lying to themselves. So, people might say, oh, the king's legit, even if he wasn't asked to. Some biographer might just be madly, zealously and ideologically possessed and want, no, the king is good, and the idea that the king is actually not really what you think he is might be too much to take for that person's psyche at that point. Because then if they're wrong about that, what else are they wrong about? And whatever, could just threaten the structures of their mind. And so they just, might subconsciously be biased. So when you're reading history, you're reading documents. We don't have a lot of the documents. So many of the documents have just not survived, which is a really crazy thing. We think, okay, I guess we'll get to that in a moment. But when you're reading these documents, you need to be aware who is writing it, what is their motivation? Do they have other motivations? Is there any bias here? And when was it made? Who was it made by? Who was it made for? So you just need to try to think of as many questions as you can and go, okay, what's actually going on here? And then read, okay, what other versions of the story are there? And usually, rather than trying to outsmart the writer, which is, kind of fighting an uphill battle there, go, okay, well, what other books are there on this thing? And look up. And in general, I think even current affairs, what's going on in the news, I go, okay, this is what, this corporate controlled legacy media says. Okay, could be true, could not be true. There's definitely a lot of lies and a lot of, if we were to be charitable, say mistakes. I feel like there's a lot of lies, definitely. Make a lot of money. Being real, there's definitely, I would say, a lot of lies in there too. But there's misperceptions. We could call them both just inaccurate information, right? You go, okay, this could be real or it could be one of those inaccurate things. Let's look at other sources. Just read different articles and stuff. And you'll start to notice, oh, everyone agrees on this. That's interesting. People who disagree on other stuff, they all agree on this. Okay, it's probably true then, that thing. Or, oh, they disagree. You said this, but then later you contradicted yourself. Oh, you contradict yourself again. No smoke without fire. Let's check out some other sources. This person seems a bit off. Just by reading lots, basically we can start to note the pattern recognition, which is inherent in our highly evolved brains, being the survivors of the survivors of the survivors of history. That pattern recognition starts to come online, and you start to notice, start to get a picture of what's actually happened. And so this goes for now. It also goes for history. Of course, many people don't have the time or interest or, what have you for investigating things this deeply. That's why traditionally we had historians. Problem these days is many historians are part of a centralized system where it's very hard to get into there if you're going to be honest, which I guess is probably been common throughout history, but as we've just mentioned, but nonetheless, that is a problem. But there is some sort of yin and yang, give and take to that, but where I suppose the historians accept that maybe certain things they can't talk about, but nonetheless, that is why we have professionals. And but speaking of some professionals who are amateur professionals, professional amateurs, that sounds like a better title. Daniele Bolelli, History on Fire podcast, incredible. Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, the godfather of the genre. I believe Daniele Bolelli was joking about how he had to go, almost like a mafia sort of thing, like to get, he felt like he wanted to ask permission from Dan Carlin because he was the kind of originator of that kind of history podcast thing. But either way, I'm sure there's other people doing it too. But you can learn a lot from podcasts, and there's a lot of professional amateurs these days who are really, you can supplement, still get your history from the professionals like in academia, but when you're looking for other sources, all these history podcasts, there's a lot of people who have no dog in the game. They're not part of that structure. And so they're able to be more honest. And maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, but it's a good idea to listen to them. And then you can start to figure out, get the pattern recognition going. Similar thing to how in the media, you have people like Joe Rogan or Russell Brand or what do you call it? Like Breaking Points, or whatever. You have different shows where they're kind of they're independent. They're not affiliated with some big bureaucracy. So they can supplement, they have their own perspectives. And so it's healthy to kind of go between them, check them out. So let's see here. Yeah, so I guess that's about that. So here we go. Juice, prepare for a tall glass of truth juice, or controversy juice. So the lost civilization hypothesis, or shall we say that just the lost civilization. So we're going to talk about the evidence for the presence of a lost civilization of prehistoric antiquity. So basically a very old civilization, an advanced civilization that existed before Sumer, Egypt, India, China, right? Or, you know, of course, I think like the Aztecs, we didn't even mention, but like in America, you had, you know, the Maya, very old civilization, and, you know, the Inca, etc. And Chavin they've realized, this is crazy. They've realized with LiDAR technology, they're able to scan like the Amazon, the forest, the Amazon rainforest, and they've scanned it and they've realized under huge areas, they found thousands of cities, ruins of cities, which they wouldn't have found otherwise. It's covered by jungle. Who's going to notice it? The jaguars don't care. They're, you know, eating DMT-rich leaves and rolling around the floor like kittens. And, you know, the caimans are trying to dodge the jaguars and go, you know, swimming about. You know, the birds are in the trees. They don't notice. But basically, we've found thousands, at least hundreds, but I think even thousands of cities all through the Amazon. A lot of them kind of like southwest, I think, kind of near the Andes Mountains. But where basically they've been abandoned. And so it seems like there was a huge ancient civilization there. And what one theory is that originally European explorers going up the Amazon, they said, well, there are like, you know, city after city after city. Like you're leaving one city, going down the river, and this huge advanced city, you know, cosmopolitan city or whatever. And then it's barely out of sight before you start seeing the beginning of another city. And so there's just all these cities everywhere. There's big, well-paved roads going into the hinterland, into the forest. And so it seems like there's some huge civilization. Europeans came back like 50 years later or 100 years later to check it out. And there was no one. Oh, these people were lying to us. Tricky, sneaky, lying historians. And it was just a myth. It wasn't true. It seems what actually happened is disease or something, maybe climate change, over agriculture, but, you know, potentially disease wiped out, you know, everyone. And then the forest just reclaimed everything. Even in Detroit these days, right? There's areas where, you know, there's financial crash and, you know, oligarchs kind of robbing the country and whatnot. You know, Detroit has had a very hard time. It had been one of the biggest manufacturing cities of the USA. And now it's, you know, it's a shell of its former self. Although I believe there's some good news of, you know, kind of hipsters moving in and stuff and trying to, you know, and renovating and, you know, cheap land and rebuilding. So that cycle is repeating, it seems. Life, the Phoenix rebirth. Things collapse. Oh, cheap land. People who haven't got much, they're at the lower end of the social rung, social ladder somewhere else. They move there and they can be the top of the new thing that they build. And then property prices get more expensive. Okay, more, you know, affluent people move in. Oh, I kind of fit in here. And then it goes up again, and even more affluent people go, oh, I kind of fit in here. And then maybe somewhere else is falling apart and the new hipsters move there to, right. But in Detroit, you have areas where there's a house has been abandoned for like 5 years and it's just utterly overrun by nature. The trees just take control. Like nature is incredibly fertile, would you believe, and just powerful at taking over. So some island off the coast of Japan or in the Pacific where it was just for mining. It was like the densest settlement of humans ever. I think they had all these huge, you know, apartment buildings, etc., just for housing the workers on this very small island, an oil rig or something like that. And then they abandoned it at some point, and now it's almost totally just obliterated by, you know, nature and vines just destroying everything, and the wind smashing the glass and all kinds of stuff. So potentially the Amazon was also featured a huge civilization which just vanished. So that's pretty crazy, right? These things happen in history. But the lost civilization. So this is not what we're talking about. This would be later, that civilization. There, basically, I read a book called Fingerprints of the Gods first, by Graham Hancock. If you want an introduction to this, a great way to do it is just go and watch Joe Rogan's interviews with Graham Hancock. So, yeah. And then some of the later ones, they have Randall Carlson joining, the venerable Randall Carlson. But but they're both great people. And it was really eye-opening and blew my mind. And so I got Graham Hancock's book, first book, and then I got another book and another book. Basically, he details, and I keep an open mind. I think there's nothing to lose by keeping an open mind. It's actually essential. So I'm open to the possibility that some of it, or even a lot of it, I struggle to believe that. But just as an exercise of humility and caution, I keep my mind open even to the idea that most of it or all of it's wrong. Maybe there's some other explanation, you know? But practically, I find it very persuasive that the things Graham talks about in these books. But basically, he's a former journalist, right? He was, you know, East Africa correspondent for like The Economist and whatever. You know, he's proper normal mainstream journalist. And then he started getting interested in historical mysteries and things that aren't quite known. And so that led him down this rabbit hole of the lost civilization. And so he, along with, you know, there are many other researchers in the field, but he's probably the best known for advancing this hypothesis, building upon the work of John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, which we'll talk about in a bit, and some other things. So here's the nutshell, in a nutshell, right? There is, so Robert Schoch and, okay, first, the mystery of the maps. This is how, so Fingerprints of the Gods begins with this, and it's talking about the evidence for Earth's lost civilization. So there are these maps from 1500, you know, kind of medieval era, late medieval era maps. The Piri-Reis map, there's a Orontius Phineas map or something like that. There's a few, half dozen, I don't know, maps, which show Antarctica. Antarctica was only discovered in 1800 by modern Europeans. And there's also certain islands, which, well, wait a minute, that was discovered, at least one island, I think, near South America, which was discovered after the map was drawn. And there's High Brazil, an island off the coast of Ireland, is on one of the maps. It's actually underwater. There is a landmass there, but it wasn't above water. It's far, far below water. So no one would know it was there. Until, you know, a long time ago was when it was above water. But Antarctica, especially, let's just focus on that. And it shows, some of them show the subglacial topography of Antarctica. So underneath the ice, what it looks like. So someone was mapping this either with advanced technology, or they did it before the ice was at its current level, and ice has fluctuated over time, right? The last ice age ended 12,000 years ago, basically. So the end of the Younger Dryas era. So so this is quite a conundrum. Like, how does that make sense? We have these maps. We know that they're there, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. One final detail is they show knowledge of advanced geometry. The problem of longitude was not solved until like 1818 or something by John Harrison. He was a clockmaker, I think, or he was a British guy. And the King of England, they put out a prize like, look, if anyone can solve the problem of longitude, which is the horizontal aspect of a map, right? Like sailors were crashing into rocks all the time and dying because they thought, oh, we're one day away from land. And then in the middle of the night, they just crash into the rocks. They were much closer. They didn't realize. They were able to judge latitude by the stars, like the vertical north-south aspect, but not east-west. And so this guy invented something like the chronometer, some sort of thing you can keep on your ship, and you can notice the difference between the time from when you left and where you are now. And so you could figure out where you are. And they were able to make much more accurate maps with that also. These old maps have knowledge of perfect longitude. And this for like 300 years before that problem was solved. This doesn't make sense, right? There's something we're missing. Now, these maps were said by the people who made them to be based upon many, many source maps, like maps which were falling apart. And so, you know, like 100 years old, some of them potentially from the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which was, you know, by the coast of, in the very north of Egypt in the Nile Delta, which was the biggest library in the world for a long time. They used to take, you know, people would come there for trade and stuff as well to Alexandria, and soldiers would come into and go, okay, we need to search your ship for books. And then if I believe that's what they did. And if they found books, they'd go, okay, how long are you here? Okay, you'll have them returned before you leave, but we need to copy these because we don't have these books. And so the books that they didn't have, they would take them, copy them, give them back to people. And so that they built up the biggest library ever. that or in the modern era, modern in history, right? The historical era, classical era. So, but not, point being, these maps, one was made by a Turkish admiral, another by these people. They were based upon older source maps. So it seems like potentially some very, very old maps contained a memory, perhaps from Egypt, right, of naval exploration from a previous age, because somehow these stuffs are there. You can look it up in Google. You can see, or the internet, I should say, and you can see it. Now, so that's one thing. Okay, interesting. Now, a second mystery is the Sphinx. There is water rainfall erosion on the Sphinx. Like all the geologists, they all agree. There was this guy, Robert Schoch, who's a geologist from Boston University, and John Anthony West, who the late, great John Anthony West, who pioneered, like picking up on the research of R.S. Schwaller de Lubitsch, the genius with the unpronounceable name. That's what he always called him. John Anthony West called him that. But yeah, this guy did an in-depth study of like Egyptian temples and was like, oh my God, there's all these secret meanings to the temples. And picking up on the traditions of that, they were listening to ancient Egyptians themselves, who said, the reason we're so amazing, we didn't just make this ourselves. We are the inheritors of a legacy. Egypt is not a development, it's a legacy. We were founded by the refugees from a lost civilization that perished under the waves. So that's what the ancient Egyptians said themselves. And then we are like, yeah, sure. Like we know better than them, and picking up on this stream of esoteric history, Schwaller de Lubitsch and John Anthony West, John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, they studied the Sphinx and said, look at all this erosion. I think John Anthony West showed a picture of it to Schoch and was like, what kind of erosion is this? And he said, oh, it's water, for sure. You can see it's like wobbly. It's not like wind erosion. And he said, where is this from? I think this is how it happened. He said, oh, the Great Sphinx. He's like, but there's been very little rainfall in Egypt for thousands of years. So either, look, before the historical era, either there was an enormous amount of rain before the historical era, or else normal-ish rain for even longer before the historical era. And the Sphinx was there already. So someone had built this thing. And he showed, they showed it to other geologists that, like, almost all of them, if not all of them, agreed. And so geology was like, oh my God, this is definitely the case. It's rain erosion. Egyptology, who were all invested with their egos and their narratives and what they've been teaching, and we know what we're doing, they were all, not to mention the political ramifications of what that could do if people go, wait a minute, well, changing your worldview, people generally, don't think about it. There's a political element too, keeping things simple, right, for the population. Not to say that's the main thing, but so the geology profession, academics, they all said, yeah, this is rainfall erosion. The Egyptologists were saying, no, that's not possible. It doesn't make sense. And so they kind of had a little battle, right? Graham Hancock picked this up and goes, okay, this is in the book, Fingerprints of the Gods. And he talks about that and also some other things. But there's a lot of other smaller details, but they're the juiciest, low-hanging fruit. If you want more, go check out the books. Magicians of the God. But okay, then people were saying, how could this be 10,000 years old? Also, I think 10,000-ish years ago, the constellation of Leo passed in front. So the Great Sphinx points east. So at dawn on the spring equinox, the sun rises above the Sphinx. I believe that's how it happens. So it looks like the Sphinx is looking right at it. At the moment, it's some other constellation, which the sun is in a different constellation, a different house, because of that 26,000-year cycle, precession of the equinox. But about 10,000 years ago, the Leo was the age of Leo. So the sun was rising in Leo and the Sphinx is like a lion. So that's interesting. It's another detail. Okay, so now people were like, well, where's all the evidence of this civilization? People said, well, look, 10,000 years, that's a long time. What would be left except for a few bits of stone? Like everything, it'd be obliterated. They're like, yeah, whatever. They, was generally scorned and, ridiculed. Then more recently, Göbekli Tepe has been discovered So, which is in southern Turkey, and they've dated it, carbon dated it to 12,000, I believe 12,800 years ago. And it is 50 times the size of Stonehenge. It is the first example of monumental architecture that we are aware of in history. And it appears in a time when we were all saying cities won't appear for another like 5,000 years. It's like, wait, so 7,000, I think 7,000 years before the conventional beginning of cities was the previous timeline that I was telling you about at the beginning of this podcast. I hope you followed it to this point to find out the truth. And they intentionally filled it in, it seems, because all the organic matter close to the top and close to the bottom is all the same. So it's all the same time. And so they found it was like a hill. It means pot-bellied hill, Göbekli Tepe. So Gobekli space Tepe, Göbekli Tepe. And they've just found another one near it now, very recently, and begun excavating it, called Karahan Tepe. And it seems the same thing. Huge structures, very advanced architecture and carvings of constellational things. It's oriented to, like, you know, this constellational astronomical alignments in it, just like Stonehenge and, you know, the pyramids and the Sphinx, etc. So how did hunter-gatherers have time to be doing this? That's ridiculous. You know, they're hunting, they're trying to just survive. You know, how that seems utterly inconceivable. And so that's the thing. And like, okay, that's very interesting. So that now means why couldn't the Sphinx be the same age? Now, there's one final thing, which, look, so Atlantis. Here we go. Here's where we're going. Now, we don't know what they called themselves, but it seems, and again, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, and I'm not, you know, I haven't drunk any Kool-Aid. I'm not subscribed to any ideology like I need to believe in it. Just following facts and implications to the best of my ability. So the story of Atlantis was taken seriously as fact until the mid 1800s, I think. And then history, like there are fashions within history. It goes back and forth, like everything, you know, like most things. And so there was a change where it was started to be treated as, there was some papers saying, oh, it's not possible geologically, it couldn't be possible, there's no island in the Atlantic. So it was, okay, it's kind of scorned and fell out of fashion. More recent evidence seems to point out that actually it is possible geologically that there was a land, there was a landmass there, it seems, around the Azores. It seems like that was at higher above sea level, and it would have been like a you know, substantial, very fertile, large island and group of islands. The Gulf Stream was going around it, so it would have been very warm and temperate during the Ice Age. So it seems that we don't, was that Atlantis? Who knows, right? But that's like an island. So that's one thing. It turned out of favor upon a false premise that it wasn't geologically possible. And then way leads to way. People read the books. Who's going to really go really, really deep into checking, you know, for certain that it was impossible? Apart from Randall Carlson, there's a video on, I think, HowTube, which is like a YouTube kind of thing, but, you know, maybe a bit more cool. HowTube, where you can see, if you want details of that, it's very interesting. Randall Carlson it's like $33, and it's like a 6-hour lecture going into the details of the geography and stuff, geology, and why, making the case for why it's called Plato's Atlantis, back to the source. And it's talking about weaving the geological evidence and what I'm about to tell you now, a summary of what the story of what Plato told us about. This is where we get the story of Atlantis, because 500, as Graham points out in his books, there are like hundreds of cultures all around the world have a story. We humans were extremely advanced, and then we were destroyed and fell from grace and had to rebuild like children with no memory of what went before. Graham calls us a species with amnesia, which is, I think, a very, pretty powerful line there. So, but one particular version of the story is it's referred to as Atlantis. That's just one of the versions, right? And this comes to us through Plato, who's who's incredibly respected, you probably know, in the intellectual tradition of the West. And so, incredible reputation, no reason to lie. he talked in the Timaeus and Critias, or Critias and Timaeus, I think is the thing where we have this story, and that, you know, there's a dialogue between people, and basically it's, I think Socrates, who's Plato's teacher. Socrates is talking to Critias the younger, and you know, and then basically Critias the younger says, look, I got this story from Critias the elder, who's his granddad or something, who got it from Dropidas, who got it from Solon, the Greek lawmaker, some lawmaker in ancient Greece, who Solon had gone to Egypt. So this was like maybe a few hundred years before Plato or something like this. The dates are recorded, but I can't remember them. He went to Egypt, and they told him, the priests in the temple, told him this story, like, we are we were founded by the refugees from a destroyed civilization of great advancement. It was sunk beneath the waves, you know, for basically we got too big for our boots, turned against the gods, whatever, got arrogant, you know, became tyrants and misused our power, and we were destroyed. The divine will turned against us, something like that. And you know, Solon's like, holy shit, man, when did this happen? And the priest says, 9,000 years ago. Imagine anyone telling you they have like a personal story of what humans were doing 9,000 years ago. And so he gets this story, and this was BC, right? This is like 500 BC or something, you know, BCE. So if you put those times together from that story, the priest saying 9,000 years ago, from that Solon, and then Solon down to Plato, and then from Plato, we know when he was writing, to us now, it is like 12,800 years ago, more or less. And it just so happens, we now know from modern science, that sea levels rose by 100 meters at exactly that time, 12,800 years ago. So that's quite a coincidence. If Plato's story, she got, you know, somehow he just knew that sea levels had risen at exactly that time, so, you know, 10,800 BC or whatever it is. That's pretty unlikely. And when you add in the maps, the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe, what seems more likely, you know, more than the 50% likely, you know, it needs to be looked into, and it is being looked into. And this is the revolution that's coming to history. And by the way, as a little side note to round that off, so Plato in this story Plato's telling, I think 3 times in the course of the story, which is a lot, that's very repetitive, they make the point of saying that this is true. It's not a story, it's not a myth, it is in fact truth. You know, they say this 3 times, at least twice, I think, pretty sure 3 times. So, you know, that's very interesting, right? So, and of course, you know, there are underground ruins, you know, in between the Sicily and mainland Italy, which are like, you know, the sea level to build them. The sea level hasn't been that low in a long, long time. And there's this kind of thing all over the place around the world. So it seems like there's good evidence to think that we have lost knowledge of civilization. Now, how would that happen? Well, as in Magicians of the Gods, which was released 20 years after Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock talks about, addresses this. And then modern research, the Comet Research Group, these scientists recently have been studying, it seems most likely some sort of extraterrestrial impact occurred around 12,800 years ago. So a comet, meteor, something like this hit, or actually it seems like a breakup of a giant comet from before. Like, so there was a stream of, you know, smaller comets. Earth passes into the Taurid meteor stream twice a year, which is something to think about. We really need to unify and protect ourselves, because this is still a threat now. We need to really stop fighting each other and get organized and find a way to mine these asteroids and make sure they don't just obliterate us and send us back to the Stone Age. But twice a year, it's like crossing a highway blindfolded, someone has said, I think Graham Hancock. You know, we're just lucky we don't get hit to date, you know, but it seems we did get hit 12,800 years ago. This is the evidence of the Comet Research Group. They found nanodiamonds and, you know, certain types of glass and, you know, platinum and stuff, these deposits in the earth, which only occur from nuclear explosions or, you know, comet impacts, something like this, right? And basically it seems like there was these impacts over the North American ice sheet and part of the European ice sheet. And it just caused an enormous liquefaction of the ice, poured into the Atlantic, huge floods, huge rivers. There's Randall Carlson does a great job talking about, and I'm sure many other people, but these are the kind of researchers I've been most drawn to and educated by. Huge canyon areas like in the Pacific Northwest of America, where there's clear evidence, according to geologists, that this was an enormous river flowing, and so you had these huge rivers flowing through the land, and water also pouring into the oceans, the Atlantic Ocean, from these impacts. And hence sea levels went up by like 100 meters. The ice age, it triggered the end of the ice age, a permanent kind of change in the ecosystem of the Earth, and so the temperature change, because the continental wildfires, like this is also, it seems, why the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tiger, and in America they're the American lion, this huge like horse-sized lion, well, even bigger, I think. All these, there are many megafauna, mass extinction of megafauna. A lot of them are in the middle of eating, and we found them. Some of them were found dead. They were like in the middle of like eating, and it wasn't like they were hunted, right? They were like just chilling, and then suddenly they're dead. So anyway, there's a lot of evidence to think that it seems most likely there was an extraterrestrial impact, which triggered the end of the ice age, or the Younger Dryas period, I suppose, and that this triggered the end of this advanced civilization, which then potentially went around the world and kind of sowed the seeds of restarting the process of civilization. And here we are. And if we were unfortunate enough to be blown apart by some sort of catastrophe, what would people remember of us? How much of our stuff would still be here in 10,000 years? There's a fair chance that certain people would manage to survive, and they would recruit hunter-gatherers and say, please help us survive. We've lost control of our food system. Our stores are running low. We don't know how to survive on our own anymore, but we have a lot of skills. We can teach you. And there would be a merging and a reboot of civilization. So that's, in a nutshell, the lost civilization hypothesis, which I think has a lot going for it. Now, let's see here. Yeah. Okay. So looking forward, I think, there's a lot of crazy stuff. I guess I'll probably get into that in another podcast, but I think there's a lot of very optimistic, there's a lot of science for great optimism in what's happening in the world. There's a lot of science for pessimism and a lot of problems, a lot of tyranny rearing its head, and censorship and totalitarianism and ideological capture, people being unwilling, unfortunately, to entertain ideas which they don't agree with, and so I suppose that can be addressed later, but it seems, history is not finished. It's still, history is eternal. It's a river, and it continues to flow. And why should you care about history? Well, the present is totally affected by history. Even from just, what we're talking about now, you can see many things where it's, why is stuff happening now? Because of stuff that happened a long time ago, a lot of it. To understand where you are and where you're going, which is probably what you want, then you need to know where you've been, right? And where you've been has been, whatever that means. So I think, but looking forward, I think I'm very optimistic, but I think it's probably going to get a lot worse, unfortunately. Probably talk about that in some other podcast, but I do think we've got some problems coming up. If you're interested in specific things, okay, you can ask me, reach out to me on social media, and I'll happy to have a conversation. But I think overall there's a rising of human consciousness, and I would say we're in the birth canal, and it's painful and squishy, but we're about to be born to a beautiful world, and Mother Earth shall be smiling down upon us, Father, Son, beaming, and we will grow into a whole new era. And I think we can grow to be a conscious global civilization, leveraging the best of modern technology and the best of ancestral wisdom and the traditions of freedom, which have somewhat been forgotten, and connection to nature, and have the best of both worlds. And then we'll be looking back at this as an incredibly interesting point in history, I believe. So that's it for now. So I'll leave it there. It took a bit longer than anticipated, but hey, history took longer than anticipated, maybe. And I've enjoyed this little micro slice of history, and I hope it has been and is an enjoyable part of your little stream of history, which is the last however long we've been going, 2 hours, I don't know. So and going forward, I think being the future, be the change you want to see in the world, so you want a good future, be the future you want, right? Of course, be it now. And so that's it. I think history really is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's true. There's these feedback loops, as we talked about, but ultimately it all comes down to consciousness. Only those who are present have an impact upon the automatic flow of momentum. And so wake up, my fellow wizards and witches, and apply the magic of your free will. And let's enjoy, let's surf the wave of history and try not to get dunked too often, and have some fun. All right. Much love. See you next time.